It's a rainy Saturday today and wanted to do a little bit of talking about drag racing in a two-wheel drive pickup truck. We have found that that is very, very difficult, and I'm sure there are people before us that figured that out too. The diesel drag racing scene is almost exclusively four-wheel drives until you get into the big horsepower stuff, and then a lot of that goes over into the two-wheel drive. When I decided that I wanted to build a race truck, I wanted to go two-wheel drive because very few people were doing it. I wanted to do it in a long bed, 12 valve, leaf spring truck, and to see what we could do with it. I quickly found out that there are very few references to call and talk to with people. Very few people have done this, probably for good reason, and we'll get into some of that good reason in a moment. But there's just not very many people to talk to. A lot of the people that you can talk to that are willing to talk to you will give you, some of it is bad advice. And it's not that they plan on it being bad advice, it's that they probably don't know any better. This two-wheel drive stuff is just drastically different, especially as you start trying to put power down. A lot of it does not correlate back to what you can do in a four-wheel drive, and it can set you back in the two-wheel drive stuff. But I kind of want to go through some of the classes here, and we'll stop at 670 index. 8th mile racing, we'll talk about ET stuff, 770 and 670. We've raced all three of those classes with two different trucks. Varying degrees of success, still work in progress on the fast stuff, but we're getting there, we're close. So want to talk about ET. ET is just your elapsed time, you're racing nobody but yourself really. That class is a blast. You don't need a race truck to go race that class. You just go out there in something that you go slam the throttle on and be able to repeat it. So to be able to repeat it in a two-wheel drive, you do not want very much horsepower, all right? So when you're going racing ET, you're just getting started, you do not want a 550 horsepower two-wheel drive truck racing ET. It is going to be miserable and you are not going to get very far. You're most likely going to get eliminated on the first elim, and that is because you are going to have traction issues. Staging issues, traction issues, it's not going to be a bunch of fun. So keep your power low so you don't spin tires, so the truck can do the same thing every time. Our red first gen makes maybe 300 horse. It doesn't weigh very much, and that thing is lethal. We run between 930s and 940s on that truck every time we take it out. And it just does its thing back to back to back consistently, and it is just a blast to drive. People are amazed that it is as fast as it is with the very few amount of mods that it has done to it, and it's just fun to drive. So keep your power low. Traction aids are still mandatory on a two-wheel drive. You cannot go out there in any pickup truck that's just two-wheel drive and not have some type of traction aid. Caltrax, assassin bars, long bars, slappers, you will need something, because if you let go of the brake at wide open throttle, your rear end is going to be jumping like crazy. You're going to break stuff, you're going to spin, some type of traction aid. The red truck just has long bars on it, and it does really good for what it is. And it's fine. It doesn't have a bunch of power. You don't need to go crazy on it. That's the only suspension modification we have done to that whole truck. Everything else is OEM leaf spring pack. It just has ladder bars on it, and that helped tremendously helping with that axle wrap. I would strongly suggest an automatic shifting transmission, meaning put it in drive to go. We have a ratchet shifter in the first gen, and it works, but the ratchet shifters are not consistent. And when you're bracket racing, you want the vehicle to do the same thing every time you hit the track. And a ratchet shifter is not that at all. You want to put it in drive, and you want the truck to just do the same thing every time. Can that make your truck slower? It can, because you're not in control of running that thing all the way out in the RPMs. But it does the same thing over and over again. Is it possible to run with a ratchet shifter? Absolutely. Is it a little bit more fun? Probably yes. Is it as consistent? Hell no. So I would recommend an automatic shifting transmission where you put it in drive and let her go. Staging on ET depends on your truck. The first gen needs almost no stage, so we just kind of pull it up to where the brakes are pushing on you, or the power's pushing the brakes, kind of doing a little creak job on you, and let it go. I would not launch at a bunch of boost in ET, because why? You're just racing yourself. So just get comfortable with the truck. You're not trying to set the world on fire, and there's no need to be launching at crazy boost levels when you're just messing around in ET. Tires and wheels, you will need, wheels can be whatever you want them to be. We're not concerned about weight and stuff yet. Tires, you will need at least some type of a good drag radial, in my opinion. And it needs to be a pretty good one. You get over that 300-ish mark and you're going to start having some tire slip issues. And that's where you may want to consider a set of small slicks, even in ET with a low horsepower truck. And they don't have to be big. The drag slicks we have for the first gen are 26 850s, and we have yet to spin those on anything. They just set and hook. Our drag radials are 315s, and they look really cool. However, those tires are the reason that we didn't go to the semifinals at Shies. And it's because we spun. The truck was super lethal. I was really good on the tree, and I was racing somebody who is excellent. Robin is awesome off the tree. You got Trier. And I did, and I was proud of myself, but I knew I lost the race before I shifted it into second gear, and that's because the truck spun. And we don't have lockup, we don't have overdrive, I don't have any nitrous on that truck, so when I spun, I had nothing to recover that time, and we lost. Beat her on the tree, lost on the big end by I think 3/10, and that's just what we lost spinning before we shifted into second gear. So tires in a two-wheel drive are critical. You cannot slip in a two-wheel drive because it's over. If you slip, it's real hard to get any of that back unless you've got some power adders you don't typically use, like just having nitrous on board, and it's only used on mid-track big end if you know you screwed up on a launch. And most importantly, ETs just go out there and have fun. ET is something for you. You do not have to be in a race truck to go race ET. Go out there in your diesel powered whatever and just go have a blast and try to figure out how to be consistent, and just enjoy getting your feet wet in the sport. Jumping up into 770s, this is where we raced in Barney all year last year, and we were wildly inconsistent. It was a fun year, but we were wildly inconsistent. The truck ran from I think it was a 722 all the way into the low 9s. I mean, we were all over the place. And we were consistently running like 750s to probably 790s. And I say consistently, that's not consistent in bracket racing, but that's kind of where we fell. And I'll explain kind of what we struggled with and some things for you guys to consider when building your truck. So in my opinion, when you get up to 770 index in a diesel pickup truck, you will be around that 650 to 700 horsepower mark, somewhere in that range. In your two-wheel drive truck, I will only recommend Caltrax or Assassin bars from this point on, being leaf spring. A long bar works and it does its job. It controls your pinion rotation, your axle wrap, but it doesn't give you any control over what the suspension is actually doing, how hard you're hitting the tires. There's no adjustability, and that's where I will tell guys to put a set of Caltrax in it, how hard you can hit the tires or how hard you can hit the chassis. That stuff really starts to matter. Torque converter selection is crucial at this kind of power because you will need to be able to stage. And in a two-wheel drive, you really don't want to be leaving much under 15 pounds of boost with the size turbo you're probably going to be running for fear of snuffing it, where when you launch and you have to grow out of it, you're just killing your time. You want to be able to launch and go. You want to be able to come up, build boost, launch consistently, and you are going to want a relatively loose converter to do that. We fought converters when we first got started doing this. It was all budget minded. Low stall converter we raced for most of that first season, and that was impossible without nitrous. It just was too big of a pain in the butt to come up into. And then the problem that you're going to run into is your brakes. So on a two-wheel drive, we obviously have one brake or one axle with two brakes holding all this power. A four-wheel drive gets the absolute pleasure of having the front axles holding the rest of the power. You can stage a four-wheel drive truck to the moon, and a two-wheel drive truck, you are hopping and skipping and bouncing and fighting the truck at the line, completely loaded up at 14, 15 pounds. It is close to miserable is the definition for it. So make sure that your brakes are on point. You've got those things where maybe a proportioning valve throwing more power to the back brakes, because you will need them staging. And your boost will almost certainly have to be in that 14 to 16 pounds of boost range. Because of that, you won't be able to make more. So making sure you have a good converter where you can stage in quickly, get some RPMs out of it, and some brakes to hold back that power is going to be very, very important. Your power and your weight starts becoming a thinking point in this class. You start thinking about how to lose weight, pulling Reese hitches off, spare tires are gone, fuel cells, stuff like that. The more weight you take off, the less power you need. The less power you need, the easier it is for you to launch, honestly. You're easier on your stuff, so weight starts to become a thinking point. Do you have to have a weight loss program in 770s? Absolutely not. But it starts to become something to think about in that class. Tires. In 770, this is where your seasoned four-wheel drive racers can lead you astray, is tire selection. We have now tried a lot of tires, and I've got another size I really want to give a whirl to, but I haven't yet. It's just everything drag racing wise seems to be expensive. What we have found is in a two-wheel drive, I would much rather be over-tired than under-tired. If you're under-tired and you spin, the race is over. If you're over-tired, okay, the truck might be a dab slower, but you didn't slip, therefore you didn't lose before the race got started. Big tires are important, in my opinion, from 770 on in a two-wheel drive. No doubt, you could get away with smaller, and the skinnier, lighter the tire is, the faster the truck can be, but the more you could fight it. We run sticky compound in everything we do, and we dead hook the trucks. And that's hard on stuff, and it's probably a little bit slower, but we dead hook. I'm sticky. When I want to go, I want to go. And what we fight is getting the truck to absorb all that. In your faster classes, especially four-wheel drive classes, you'll see guys with much harder compounds, radials, and what we're trying to do drag racing when we launch is you're trying to get the tires spinning to go. Acceleration is key, and with a harder compound tire, you are introducing a slip. It's a controlled burnout, if you will, but that front end is a controlled burnout too. So you have just tons of traction, even though you are slipping a little bit, allowing your wheel speed to get up. If you do that in a two-wheel drive and your chassis can't stick it, you're going to spin. You're going to really spin, and the race is over. So we choose to run a sticky compound. and that sticky compound we're dead hooking. And that is where I have found the best results with. We currently run a 1350 wide, a 32 1350. Barney has expensive wheels and tires on it, so we have spent money to have lightweight wheels front and back. The 22s with street tires on them, those things weigh 82 pounds a corner. That is a lot when you start thinking about getting a truck going from the stop. Our front tire and wheel assemblies now weigh 36 on the skinnies with pizza cutters, and the back tires 32 1350 15s on those aluminum bead locks weigh, I think, 52 pounds per side. So we've cut a tremendous amount of rolling weight, unsprung weight out of the truck with wheels and tires. That unsprung weight is important. Try to figure out how to get rid of some of that. We've machined some of our brake drum material down, losing weight there. Figure out how to get rid of some of that unsprung weight. You can't get rid of all of it, but that's important weight to get rid of. Mile per hour at the back door on 770s is going to be right around 90 mile an hour. We've ran as fast as 770s at 74. That's me lifting at like half track. And we've run 770s as fast as 96. That's because I had a horrible front half. But on average, you're going to be in that 89, 90, 91. If your truck is dialed in, you are right around 90 running out the back door in 770s. Again, in this class, I will recommend an automatic shift valve body. Put the truck in drive if possible, and just let the truck do its thing. It makes you more consistent. This is an entry-level fast class, and the less things that you have to do as a driver, the easier it is to get good. The one downside here to that auto shift transmission is when you do a burnout, you will have to do a burnout in a two-wheel drive truck in 770s and up. You really need to end your burnout on a Chrysler transmission in third. So do a big old burnout in 1, 2, 3, and shift it from 2 to 3 quick. It doesn't have to be a long burnout, but you need to end your burnout in third so you're not smoking the sprag in the transmission. So that can be a little bit of a pain to do, but still doable on the column. If you choose to do that, just know that your burnout needs to end in third if you can to save that transmission. Jumping up into 670s, it is, in my opinion, that you have to have a trans brake. It is very difficult in 770s to launch with that around 700 horsepower mark. In 670s, depending on your truck, you're 950 to 1,050 horsepower somewhere. You can do less if your truck weighs nothing. If you've done some type of engine transplant and your power to weight ratio is nuts, but I would say most people running 670 index are still in regular pickup trucks that have just been gutted. And most of those people are going to weigh between 5 and 5,500 pounds. 950 to 1050 horsepower is what most of us or the people you will run across run horsepower wise. A trans brake and a two-wheel drive is going to be mandatory. So you can come up, stage, you're not fighting your physical foot brake, bump in and do your thing. Now the trans brake is hard on stuff, and you are going to leave broken parts behind you while you figure out your chassis, your RPMs to launch, your power. The trans brake is hard on stuff. There is no sugarcoating it. It is rough. We have fought issues with the RPM at launch. So we had a really loose converter this past season, and it was phenomenal staging turbos, absolutely phenomenal. The problem was I could not launch any less than 3,000 RPMs on that converter, because anything less than 3,000 RPMs, and at 3,000 I was at like 14, 15, maybe 16 pounds of boost. That was it, like bare minimum of where I want to be. And if I bump my fuel up anymore at staging, I was, 18, 20, 25 pounds of boost. But I was at like 3,400 RPMs. And that is the very first launch on a trans brake that sent the output shaft out the back end, screwed up a yoke, messed up a whole bunch of stuff. It was a very expensive oopsie daisy. I didn't have the chassis, and I don't have the chassis, nor will you if you're a leaf spring truck still, to absorb that type of a hit. So we went to a tighter converter, haven't got to play with it much yet. The truck is all dinged up right now. But just playing in the driveway, we are at 2,800 RPMs, which is just a tad higher than what we were when we were foot braking in 770s. 770s, we were around 2,600 foot braking. What we're trying to achieve with the tighter converter, even though it is much more of a pain to stage in, is I want to launch softer. We are hitting the chassis too violently on the trans brake, and we don't have Pro Mod power. So we can hit it really hard with a whole bunch of torque, but we don't make 1,800 horsepower. So we wrinkle the tires and we smack the chassis, but we don't have the power to keep the chassis and the tires hit. Therefore, we make it about 2 feet and everything bounces and unloads, and then carnage happens. So at this power level, launching becomes very, very crucial, dialing in your setup so that your chassis and your tires and your engine RPM and your converter all take that hit. That initial hit when you come out of the hole is very important in 670s in a two-wheel drive. There is no recovering from it. It's right or it's wrong. Horsepower to weight here, we talked about the horsepower and the weight, about 1,000 and 5,000 to 5,500 pounds. Tires and wheels we've talked about a little bit. Start spending some money on your tires and wheels. I like big tires, and they may slow you down a little bit, but those big tires are traction, and we are dead hooking in a two-wheel drive, especially with your leaf spring stuff. Most people don't have the money or the want to go 4-link, where you have much more adjustability. So put some big tires on it. Your suspension work is very important here. You didn't need much suspension work in 770s. I didn't hint at that up there, but we can. So from 770s, consider putting at least dual adjustable shocks in the back, some race shocks. We run Caltrax, we run QA1s in the back, dual adjustables, so that you can adjust that rear suspension, how hard it hits and how quickly it recovers. We run dual adjustables on all 4 corners in 670, and I have revalved in the front to hang the front end. So as the truck transfers, I want it to hang before it settles. Instead of just coming up and collapsing, I want it to hang. So your suspension starts becoming really important with your shocks and how you do that stuff. A very overlooked part is the rear suspension. And our leaf spring, the truck's never not going to be a leaf spring. Clamp the front spring hanger, the front springs together, the pack together. You want very little to no movement. That front spring's trying to turn into an S, and you want to stop that. The Caltrax help clamp the springs together. All of the rubber bushings in the back of our race truck have been replaced. They are all aluminum with greasers. What you're doing there is, if you take the rear suspension out of the truck, all my joints are just floppy joints like this. Versus if it was rubber, you got to physically pull on the shackles and the bushings in the leaf springs. What we're trying to achieve there is where when the truck the power smacks the chassis is able to do work and not be fought back with the rubber. So we want as much movement as possible out of that rear hanger setup. So it's got longer hangers so that we can move the spring farther forward as a leaf spring truck will separate tire to fender. You're going to separate, and as the tire's driven into the ground, and you want that motion to be as free and easy as possible, and you want to have a lot of it. We don't run sliders. You could easily convince me into sliders for the rear end, and what that's doing is freeing up more motion. But again, I want it to be an OEM chassis truck, as close as coming out of the factory as it was. I really don't want to do a bunch of hardcore chassis modifications on this thing. It's just not as relatable as I want it to be. So that's why we don't run sliders. But they're trying to achieve the same thing I'm talking about with the aluminum bushings and the greasers, is you want motion in your rear suspension so that you can hit the tires and that power can be absorbed as you grow and put the power to the ground. Mile per hour out the back door in 670s is going to be 101 to 103 most of the time for the guys that are super competitive. I know guys that can do it under 100, and I know guys that do it at like 109. But most guys will be in the low 100s. At this power level, you will almost certainly be a manual valve body. The reason is not consistency. The reason is so you can be in control of the RPMs, because we are now operating at a much higher RPM when we shift. So that old 12 valve in the garage over there, we shift 1.2 at 4,500. We go out the back door at right around 4,100. So you are really running that gear out a lot farther and shifting down, versus an automatic shift is going to shift you way lower in the 3,000s and drag you back down into torque. So a manual valve body is most likely going to be mandatory in a 670 index truck, so you can run the RPMs out and get your wheel speed up before you're shifting into the next gear. 670 trucks also need a roll bar, something to think about. You're going to be adding at least 100 pounds throwing a roll bar into this thing. Talked about the shackles, the joints. The other thing to think about in a two-wheel drive truck is your pinion angle. Pinion angle is an interesting thing. Like the adjustment does make a difference, and you're trying to go a slight negative. So your drive shaft's coming in, and as you hit, being a leaf spring, your rear end is going to come up. Okay, and what you're trying to do is, on the hit, you want to be like this as the truck starts to accelerate. And when you get off the throttle, you're going to come back down. The farther the pinion is pointed down, the harder the rear tires dig on the launch. The more she's pointed down, the harder that hit's going to be on the tires. You can get too much negative pinion angle, and that's going to make for some really high stresses on your U-joint. So just, every truck's going to be different. Be careful with your pinion angle, but it's going to be necessary for you to piddle with at this power level, and that's because your rear suspension is working so hard. When you hit it, you don't want to come past, your drive shaft. This right here kind of angle, you are going to blow up a U-joint at wide open throttle. This you could get away with, but you've probably got a pretty negative pinion angle, and it's not going to street very well. You're going to go through U-joints quite a bit and have vibrations. You want to underload, hit, and be lined up parallel, and then come back down when you let off the throttle. So pinion angle is something to play with as well. And that's kind of it, kind of a decent talk about what to expect in these classes and a brief idea on how to set them up. You do not have to spend a fortune to build any of these trucks. Until the last hit on Barney here a couple of months ago, we had far less than $20,000 in that truck, including the purchase of it. That had been racing for 2 seasons. A 770 truck, you can build that thing, especially if you own the truck, you can build that thing for under 10 grand, no problem, and have that thing where it's pretty darn consistent. So this type of racing isn't super expensive. You can go nuts in 670. There are plenty of people that have way more money in their trucks than I do in 670s, but it's not necessarily mandatory. It's getting the rest of the truck set up, reacting like it needs to. It's not just about raw horsepower and, I got this massive dyno sheet and we go race X class. You have to be able to get that power to the ground, and that is the biggest hurdle in a two-wheel drive. A four-wheel drive guy needs a set of long bars and a set of radials, and they can do pretty much whatever the hell they want until they're around 1,000 horsepower. Doesn't matter, the truck's going to hook and it's going to go straight. That is not what you're going to find in a two-wheel drive. It is a very different creature, and you will spend a lot of effort trying to get the chassis to react. And once you get that chassis taking the power, that is when you start picking up all your time and start raising eyebrows from the four-wheel drive guys. It's fun. It's a blast. Don't be afraid to be different. But two-wheel drive racing is tough. If you don't have it in your heart, in your soul, to keep after it, and you don't easily get discouraged, try it out. If you just want to go screw around, you don't know a whole bunch about what you're doing, you just know you want to go, smoke the throttle pedal at the drag strip, do a four-wheel drive. Hands down, period, do a four-wheel drive. It is so much easier to drag race in a four-wheel drive diesel pickup truck. You don't have to worry about anything suspension-wise really, other than put traction bars on the back so your rear end isn't hopping. Aside from that, it's just get in and go. The two-wheel drives are very different, and they are going to require a lot more piddling with to get them right. But hopefully that was insightful. There's not very much information out there on the two-wheel drive pickup truck, leaf spring, drag racing. It is really hard to find information, and I've enjoyed learning and getting better at what we're doing, and hopefully videos like this can help other guys get started so they don't have to go through 2 years of hardships trying to figure out how to go straight. Have a good one, guys.